Hi children, I am going to continue the lesson Post-War World and India. Now let us have a quick recap of what we learnt in the first part. We learnt about the two power blocks formed after the Second World War and United Nations Organization, which was formed to establish peace and security in the world countries, and also the different organs through which it functions, 6 organs, and about the two power blocks USA and USSR, and the tactics which were used during this Cold War by USA and USSR we learnt about, and we learnt about military alliances formed by this USA and USSR also, and in what way these alliances helped both the superpowers USA and USSR, and we learnt about arms and space race, how this arms race extended into space also between USA and USSR, and we learnt about non-aligned movement. Now let us continue it. The leaders of these newly independent countries, they too felt that just like in India, the then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, he chose a new path without joining either of the blocs, and he named it as non-alignment movement, without joining either of the blocs, to remain neutral in international politics. And this was named as NAM. And even the leaders of newly independent countries, other countries like Yugoslavia, Indonesia, Egypt, all these countries, they became Kenya, independent only after the Second World War. And all these countries also decided to follow the same path like India. And for that purpose, in 1955, a conference was held in Bandung. Bandung is in Indonesia, and in this Bandung, a conference was held in 1955. It is famously known as Bandung Conference. And it was the first Asia-African conference. Remember, it was the first conference in which Asian and African countries represented. So it was the first Asia-African conference represented by 29 nations. And the most important leaders who attended this meeting were, first of all, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, because he was the pioneer of this non-aligned movement, and Nasser of Egypt, and Tito of Yugoslavia. And Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, he was the chief spokesperson of this Bandung Conference. And in this Bandung Conference only, all the other newly independent countries also, they decided to follow the same path like India. That means they decided to follow non-alignment movement. That means non-alignment movement got international status in Bandung Conference. Bandung Conference was held in 1955 at Bandung in Indonesia. And in this conference, it was decided by all the newly independent countries that they will also follow non-alignment movement. That means without joining either of the blocs, they will remain neutral in international politics. It was decided by the newly independent countries in this conference. So, NAM got international status in this conference. And this NAM was established as an international organization with an aim to promote cultural and economic cooperation among the newly independent countries. Because all the newly independent countries now, they are choosing NAM. So if they become members of NAM, to promote cultural and economic cooperation between these newly independent countries of Asia, Africa, and also Latin America. That was the main aim of this NAM. And to stop the newly independent countries from joining either of the blocs, that was also the main aim of NAM. And the first NAM summit was held at Belgrade in Yugoslavia. Belgrade is in Yugoslavia, and in Belgrade it was held in September 1961. The first NAM summit was held, and it was attended by 25 member countries. And by 2012, the membership, that means number of member countries, increased to 120, and with 17 observers. And the first summit, NAM summit, was held because of 3 reasons, major reasons. What are they? To establish cooperation among the member nations of NAM, most of them who had newly emerged as free countries. All the newly independent countries, they joined NAM. So to establish cooperation among the member nations of NAM. And secondly, to reduce the growing tensions of Cold War between the two blocs. Between these two power blocs, tensions were increasing. And this tension was named as Cold War. So growing Cold War tensions, to reduce the growing Cold War tensions between the power blocs. And lastly, to prevent any of the newly independent countries from joining any of the power blocks. To stop it from joining either Western Bloc or Eastern Bloc, to remain neutral in international politics. With these aims, this first summit was held at Belgrade in Yugoslavia. And over the years, now let us see what were the achievements of NAM. NAM helped countries like India to take an independent posture, but because we did not join either of the blocs and we remained neutral. So it helped countries like India to take an independent position in international politics without joining either of the blocs. When the world got divided, when the world became bipolar world, got divided into two power blocs, without joining any of the two blocs, India could remain neutral in international politics. And that is because of NAM only. And it also helped the newly emerging countries to take the help from superpowers by playing one against the other. Suppose these newly independent countries, they try to join one power bloc. The other power bloc will come forward to help it, because it will force the country to join its bloc. So the newly independent countries, they started playing one against the other. And to some extent, it also helped to ease tensions between the two blocs were reduced due to NAM. And even though both the blocs looked at NAM with suspicion, because US thought the NAM is very close to USSR, because on certain occasions the actions taken by NAM were like that. So US regarded that NAM is very close to USSR, because when USSR invaded Afghanistan to establish communist government there, just now we read about it, then NAM did not take any action. And this inaction of NAM created a suspicion in US that NAM was very close to USSR. So on certain occasions, US regarded NAM as being closer to USSR. And on certain occasions, USSR also thought that NAM is very close to US. And even NAM could NAM's another weak point was it could not stop wars between its own member countries. For example, when Iran and Iraq, they were at war with each other for more than 7 years. They were at war with each other, Iran and Iraq, but NAM was unable to stop the war. And in spite of all these limitations, the NAM helped the newly independent countries to maintain their autonomy in international politics in a world torn between two superpowers. Now, the West Asian conflicts. West Asia means it is the region between Europe and Asia. The region between Europe and Asia is called as West Asia, and it is also known as Middle East. And in this area, conflicts developed between Arabs and Jews. And these conflicts which were developed between the Arabs and Jews, they were described as West Asian crisis. West Asian crisis means the clashes or conflicts which took place between the Arabs and Jews. And it was mainly related to the occupation of Palestine. Palestine, it is a country which was inhabited by Arabs. And of course, it was under the control of Britain before Second World War. And in this Palestine, Jerusalem is situated. Jerusalem, it is a holy city for all the three, Jews, Christians and Muslims also. For all these three communities, Jerusalem is the holy city. And this Jerusalem is located in Palestine. So over the occupation of this Palestine, there were clashes between the Arabs and the Jews. And these clashes were named as West Asian crisis. Now let us see what happened to the Jews. The Jews, traditionally they belonged to Palestine, and they considered this Palestine as their promised land, as if this Palestine was promised to them by God himself. That was their belief. They traditionally considered Palestine as their promised land, but from there they were driven out of this promised land. From Palestine, they were driven out of Palestine, and then they spread across Europe and Asia, and they settled there. But in Europe also, they were a persecuted community. They were not welcomed in Europe also, because Christians, they considered these Jews as responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was put on cross. This is called crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And for this, Jews were responsible. That is the belief of Christians. So these Jews also, when they went to European countries and they settled there, they were not welcomed in Europe also. And they were persecuted. And the conflict reached its peak in Germany under the rule of Hitler. When Nazis came to rule Germany, Hitler, he jailed and killed millions of Jews. More than 60 million Jews were killed by him, by Hitler. So this is West Asian crisis. Now let us see how it was solved. A movement called Zionist movement was started to unite all the Jews spread all across the world. Wherever these Jews are there in the world, all over the world, to unite all those Jews and again claim Palestine as their homeland. That was the main aim of this Zionist movement. A movement called Zionist movement was started to unite all the Jews all over the world and to reclaim Palestine as their homeland again and to build a separate state for Jews. Till then there was no separate state for Jews. If they were driven out, they used to leave the country, and if they were welcomed, they used to come back. They don't have their own country. So they wanted to build a separate state of Jews. And with that aim, a Zionist movement was started. And this movement was supported by USA. I told you, whenever any incident takes place in any other country, USA and USSR, they rush. And this movement, Zionist movement, to unite the Jews, was supported by USA. And now, Palestine, it became a bone of contention between the Arabs and the Jews. And when massive oil reserves were discovered in this Middle East, and this matter was more complicated because in the Middle East more oil wells were discovered. And when these were discovered, immediately USA and USSR, they rushed to the region because they wanted to extract more and more oil to get profits from that. So they wanted to bring more part of this Middle East under their control. So both USA and USSR also rushed to this Middle East. And in 1947, United Nations, it passed a resolution. According to this resolution, Palestine was divided into two parts. When the Zionist movement spread throughout the world to unite the Jews and to reclaim Palestine as their homeland, the United Nations interfered, and in 1947 it passed a resolution, and according to this resolution, Palestine was divided into two parts. One part belongs to Arabs and the other part belongs to Jews. A separate state of Israel was found for Jews. The state where the Jews will live, it was called as Israel. And Palestine, Arabs. Israel, Jews. And the Arabs did not agree to give up their homeland to the Jews. Now, Arabs were living there from the beginning, so they did not want to give up their homeland to the Jews. Now, they refused to recognize Israel as a legitimate state for the Jews. And now, when the Jews occupied their Israel state, they followed certain policies, and according to these policies, the Arabs were forced to leave their homes and properties and go elsewhere. As refugees, they had to go to the other Arab countries. So, now a separate state of Jews was found, Israel, and this was not accepted by the Arabs because Arabs were living there since from the beginning. So, they did not accept this Israel as a legitimate state for the Jews. But when Jews followed certain policies according to which the Arabs were forced to leave their homes and properties and they had to go back to some other Arab countries as refugees. Now that is about Zionist movement. Now let us see the other side when USSR entered into the scene. The president of Egypt, he is Nasser, Gamal Abdel Nasser, and he made an effort to unite all the Arabs. To unite all the Jews, Zionist movement was started. To unite all the Arabs all over the world, Nasser of Egypt, he made an attempt. And he formed Fidayins. Fidayins are suicide squads. These were formed by Nasser of Egypt for causing bomb explosions in public places in Israel, to kill number of people in Israel. Because now Israel was a Jewish state. So he was supporting the Arabs. So he formed Fidayins, suicide squads, for causing bomb explosions in public places. to destroy Israel and to kill more number of Jews in Israel. And also to construct a dam on Nile River, Aswan Dam. This is the most important dam on Nile River, Aswan Dam. Egypt took loan from United States. United States gave economic support to Egypt to construct Aswan Dam on Nile River. But now Egypt was supporting the Arabs. So USA withdrew its funds. First it gave its support to Egypt for constructing Aswan Dam on Nile River. But as soon as Egypt supported the Arabs, because USA was supporting the Jews, and against Jews, Arabs were there. Arabs were supported by Egypt. So immediately USA took back its funds from Egypt. Of course, it was completed somehow by taking help from USSR. Now USSR entered into the scene by taking economic support from USSR. The Suez Canal was also nationalized by Egypt, and also this Aswan Dam was constructed. It was completed. And USSR supplied arms and ammunition also for Egypt for fighting against the West. Now in 1956, between Arabs and Jews, many conflicts and attacks took place. In 1956, Israel attacked Egypt with support of Western powers, and both USA and USSR demanded for ceasefire. Ceasefire means to take back the armies. And Israel withdrew its army. And in 1967, again Arabs attacked Israel. And Israel, in turn, again attacked Egypt and destroyed its entire air force. And Israel also occupied many territories like Gaza, West Bank, etc. In spite of UNO's resolution, though UNO passed a resolution to give back these territories, Israel refused to give back the territories occupied by it. But it took back its army. It accepted for ceasefire, and so it took back the army, but it did not accept to give back the territories. Now, formation of PLO. PLO means Palestinian Liberation Organization. It was an organization which was established in 1964 in Jordan. And it was formed by Yasser Arafat. He was the leader of PLO. And in 1967, this PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, under the leadership of Yasser Arafat, it pressurized and forced the Arab states to attack Israel. Are you following me? Yasser Arafat formed PLO, and in 1967, under the leadership of Yasser Arafat, this PLO brought pressure on the Arab states to attack Israel. But the Arab states were not in a position to attack Israel. They didn't like it. They were not interested in. So, a faction of PLO, that means these Yasser Arafat and the PLO also, they resorted to terrorist activities. When the Arabs refused to attack Israel, immediately the PLO resorted to terrorist activities like plane hijackings, holding hostage the Israeli Olympic squad from Israel. It was going to attend Munich Olympics in September 1972, and that plane was hijacked by PLO. And all the players who were going to play in Olympics, they were killed, and killing many of the sport persons. And Israel used such attacks by Palestinians to mount further attacks on them and refused to implement the promises it had made. Israel made many promises, but it did not implement them. And this PLO, it hijacked the plane in which Olympic squad was from Israel. It was traveling to attend Munich Olympics in September 1972, and most of the sports persons, they were killed. The plane was hijacked and they were killed. And this region of West Asia was constantly in a state of war and terrorist attacks because of moves and counter moves. If one country makes a move, as a counter move, the other country does something contrary to it. So, because of these moves and counter moves, it was constantly in a state of war and terrorist attacks. Yasser Arafat, he gave up his terrorism and he wanted to find a peaceful solution for the problem. And he recognized the Israel state also. In the beginning, he did not recognize, but now he recognized the Israel state, and he held talks with Israel to put an end to war and made many agreements regarding self-rule for Palestinians. He wanted self-rule for Palestinians, and for that he negotiated talks with Israel. And Israel also agreed to withdraw its forces and to give voting rights to the Arabs living in Palestine. And though Israel made promises, it could not implement them. And also Israel continued to attack Palestine for something or the other. Under the pretext of something or the other, Israel used to continue to attack Palestine. And at last, Arafat died in 2004 due to some suspected poisoning. He lost his life. Now, another important one is growth of nationalism in the Middle East. In the Middle East region, USA became unpopular. Why it became unpopular? Because it supported Zionist movement. In the Middle East region, USA became unpopular because of two reasons. Its continuous support to Israel, that is Jews, and also due to supporting undemocratic regions in this region. Why it supported undemocratic regimes? Because so that it could extract oil reserves. Because oil reserves were discovered, and to extract these oil reserves, it supported the undemocratic regimes also in this region. And because of these two reasons, USA became most unpopular in Middle East. Whereas people wanted that these oil resources should be used for the welfare of the local people only. And in 1968, a coup took place in Iraq. And in this coup, Saddam Hussein came to power with a promise to nationalize these oil resources. And similar developments took place in Libya also, under the rule of Muammar Gaddafi. That we learnt in 9th class already. Was rewind in your mind. And in 1979, a revolution took place in Iran. And in this revolution, the old king of Iran, who was supported by USA, was removed and new government set up. And in Afghanistan also, when USSR left in 1985, the Taliban took over the control, and Taliban were religious extremes. Already we learnt about it. And they forced the people to follow the rules laid down in religious textbooks strictly. And under Taliban, women and religious minorities were denied basic freedom and equal opportunities also. Now, there was growing dissatisfaction among the Arabs during the 21st century beginning. During the beginning of the 21st century, there was growing dissatisfaction among the Arabs, and it resulted in the growth of terrorism. The dissatisfaction among the Arabs resulted in the growth of terrorism. That means they resorted to terrorist activities. Some Arab terrorists, they hijacked 2 aircrafts in the US and crashed them into the World Trade Center, which is located in New York. And in this crash, WTO crash, thousands of people were killed. That means these 2 planes, aircrafts, they crashed into the building of the World Trade Center. So whoever was there on duty at that time in those buildings, they were killed on the spot. Thousands of people were killed in this attack. Now, peace movements, collapse of USSR and the end of the Cold War. Between 1985 and 1991, USA and USSR, who were the main competitors in arms race, they were forced to put an end to their arms race. All the environmentalists, scientists, social activists also, they brought pressure on these 2 countries to put an end to their arms race. And these 2 countries held talks. Already we discussed about it in the previous lesson, that is SALT. SALT means Strategic Arms Limitation Talks. But these talks were a failure. They were not successful. Then both the countries, they signed a treaty in 1991. They signed a treaty, START. What is the full form of START? The largest arms control treaty it was. It was Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. It was the largest arms control treaty in the world. And when this treaty was signed and implemented, though it was signed in 1991, it was implemented in 2001. 80% of the nuclear weapons which were existing at that time, they were banned. And that is why it became the largest arms control treaty in the world. This already we learned. And when Gorbachev became the president of USSR, he introduced 2 reforms. Very important, you have to remember these two names. He introduced two reforms, Glasnost and Perestroika. For the economic recovery of USSR, he introduced two reforms. They were Glasnost and Perestroika. And it was around the same time that the countries of Eastern Europe which joined USSR bloc faced serious economic problems, and USSR was not in a position to help them. So many popular movements were led by the people demanding freedom and democracy and economic reforms. And very soon the governments which could not manage the country, they collapsed. And for example, demolition of Berlin Wall, separating East and West Germany. When Eastern Germany joined the USSR bloc and Western Germany joined the USA bloc, a Berlin Wall was constructed in between, separating both East and West Germany. And that Berlin Wall was now demolished because the governments could not manage controlling the people. So, to uniting both again East and West, Berlin Wall was demolished. And this Berlin Wall was built between East and West Germany when Eastern Germany joined the USSR bloc and Western Germany joined the USA bloc. You can see it in the picture also. Here you can see in the picture, demolition of Berlin Wall. In USSR, Boris Yeltsin, he won the presidential elections. In 1991, he became the president of USSR, and he was the president of USSR who announced the disbanding of USSR in 1991. In 1991, USSR got disintegrated. That means Russia became a separate state, and all the other Eastern European countries which joined USSR bloc, they also got independence and formed into separate state. That is called disintegration of USSR. And this disbanding of USSR was announced by Boris Yeltsin, who became the president of USSR in 1991 elections. And after the disintegration of USSR, all the countries within USSR became independent. And 1945 to 1991, the world was divided into two blocks. That means it was bipolar world. Now USSR collapsed. All the states got separated. So there is no other block. There is only one block, that is USA. So there is no Cold War. It was an end to the Cold War also. USA, USSR, and with the disintegration of USSR in 1991, the world became unipolar. Till then it was bipolar and it became unipolar now. And the Cold War also came to an end. I will stop it here and continue in the next part.